Hello.
Don't you feel the heat?
What do I do now?
I never get to do that.
This might be the most dangerous film ever made. I'm not even exaggerating, it's backed by the numbers. Director Noel Marshall and his wife Tippi Hedren were traveling through Africa when they spotted lions living in an abandoned house. Most people would find that terrifying. These two looked at it and thought, let's make a heartwarming family movie about it. So they bought 130 untrained big cats and moved them into their suburban Los Angeles home with their children. The plan was to make a movie about humans and wild animals living together in harmony. What followed was 11 years of absolute carnage and the most dangerous film production in history. Half the cast and crew got injured, 70 people out of 140. The cinematographer got scalped by a lion, 220 stitches, and he actually came back to finish the movie. Hedren's daughter, Melanie Griffith, got mauled so badly she needed facial reconstruction. Marshall himself was attacked more than a dozen times, bitten through the hand, puncture wounds to the face, eventually hospitalized with gangrene that took years to heal. At some point, you have to ask, why didn't anyone walk away? The answer is they couldn't. Marshall had sunk his entire fortune into this thing, all the money he'd made producing The Exorcist. $17 million. There was no version of this where he admitted it was a mistake, so people kept getting hurt and he kept filming. The movie made just $2 million at the box office. Never got a real theatrical release until 2015. 2 movies in and Wesley Snipes had a good thing going. Then he found out who was directing the third one and decided to tank it. See, David Goyer had written all 3 Blade scripts. He was actually a solid writer. So New Line Cinema figured he understood the character and gave him the directing job. Snipes took this as a personal insult and spent the entire production making Goyer's life hell. According to Patton Oswalt, who was in the movie, Snipes basically checked out. He'd sit in his trailer getting high while his stand-in did the actual work. When it was time for a close-up, he'd come out, do his lines, and disappear again. And when he needed to talk to Goyer about anything, he wouldn't do it face-to-face. He'd write it on a post-it note. At one point, Snipes accused Goyer of racism over a background actor's t-shirt. The story that went around was that Snipes tried to strangle him. Snipes denied it years later, pointed out that a black man physically attacking a white director on a film set would have ended up in handcuffs, not just gossip. Whatever actually happened, Goyer was shaken enough that he went out that night and hired a group of bikers as personal bodyguards. Kept them on set for the rest of the shoot. Goyer called it the most painful experience of his career. Snipes sued everyone for $5 million, and Blade stayed dead for 15 years. Terry Gilliam made a genuinely great film. 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, critics loved it, and the studio that owned it actively tried to make sure nobody saw it. The production was already a disaster. The producer had lied about his experience and promised it could be made in Italy for $25 million. It ended up costing $46 million. The Italian crew sabotaged equipment. Animals kept dying. A custom strike stranded costumes in another country. Eric Idle called it madness. But the production problems didn't kill the movie. The studio politics did. An executive named David Putnam had greenlit it, and then Putnam got ousted. A new regime came in under Dawn Steele, and they decided that anything Putnam had touched was poison. Didn't matter if it was good, didn't matter if it could make money. It was a Putnam project, and Putnam projects had to die. Gilliam begged Steele to see it as a Terry Gilliam film instead of a Putnam film. She refused. So Columbia released it in 117 theaters. They spent $0 on marketing. One executive allegedly told the visual effects team he wasn't going to pay them because he didn't want to do anything that could benefit Terry Gilliam. The film actually did well in the theaters that showed it. Audiences liked it. But Columbia ran exit polls trying to prove it wouldn't play in suburban markets. They refused to print more copies. They wanted it to fail so they could say Putnam's taste was bad all along. Richard Stanley spent 4 years of his life developing an adaptation of Herbert George Wells. This was his passion project. He finally got it greenlit with Bruce Willis attached to star, and then everything collapsed in about 2 weeks. Willis went through a brutal divorce with Demi Moore and dropped out. The replacement was Val Kilmer, who immediately announced he'd only work 60% of the days Willis had committed to. This meant the entire production had to be restructured around one actor's schedule. They had to push James Woods off the project entirely just to make the math work. Then a hurricane hit the location and destroyed everything they'd built. Stanley called it soul-destroying. And after all that, after 4 years of development, the studio fired him 3 days into filming. They brought in John Frankenheimer to try to salvage $40 million worth of this dumpster fire. Frankenheimer had a reputation for handling difficult actors, so they hoped he would keep Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando in check. The two of them got into a standoff that became legendary on set. Both refused to come out of their trailers until the other one came out first. So they just sat there. The entire crew stood around waiting while the budget burned. The movie made $27 million against a $40 million budget, became one of the biggest box office bombs of the 90s, and Brando and Stanley actually became friends after the whole mess, so at least something good came out of it. On paper, this one should have worked. You had Elaine May, one of the sharpest comedy writers in Hollywood. You had Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman playing two terrible songwriters who accidentally stumble into Cold War espionage. Big stars, proven talent, solid premise. What could go wrong? Turns out, everything. But not for the reasons you'd expect. The shoot in the Sahara was a mess from day one. May and her cinematographer fought over every single shot. Beatty was also producing, and he kept siding with the cinematographer, so May felt like she was being ganged up on. The budget blew past $40 million. 3 separate editing teams worked on the movie at the same time. One cut for Beatty, one for Hoffman, and one for May. Nobody could agree on anything. Plenty of movies have had difficult shoots and turned out fine. What killed this one happened in an office in Los Angeles. Halfway through production, Columbia Pictures replaced their studio head with a British producer named David Putnam. And Putnam hated Warren Beatty, like personally despised him. Years earlier, Putnam had publicly said Beatty should be spanked for overspending on his movie Reds. He'd also feuded with Hoffman. So now the guy running the studio has a vendetta against both of the stars of one of his biggest productions, and he starts leaking embarrassing stories to the press. Every problem on set, every budget overrun, every piece of drama ended up in newspapers. The movie made $14 million on a $40 million budget. Beatty and May barely spoke for 2 years after. May didn't get another screenwriting credit for 9 years, and she never directed another movie. Her career just ended. Don't Worry, Darling became way more famous for its off-screen drama than anything in the actual movie. It started during production. Harry Styles and director Olivia Wilde started dating while she was still with Jason Sudeikis. Then anonymous sources started leaking stories about problems on set. Florence Pugh and Wilde allegedly had a screaming match. The story was that Wilde kept disappearing with Styles while Pugh was left carrying the whole production. There were even rumors that Pugh had to step in and direct scenes herself. By the time they got to the Venice Film Festival premiere, things were already toxic. But Venice made it worse. Pugh flew in at the last possible moment and skipped the press conference entirely. Chris Pine sat through the panel looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. And then the internet lost its mind over footage that looked like Harry Styles spit on Chris Pine. They called it Spitgate. Pine's representatives actually had to issue an official statement saying no, he did not get spit on. The movie opened to $19 million. For a $35 million budget with Harry Styles and Florence Pugh, that's an underperformance. It's sitting at 38% on Rotten Tomatoes. Nobody talks about the actual film. They just talk about the mess. Took Wilde 4 years to direct another movie after this. You know that thing where you meet your hero and they turn out to be an asshole? Kevin Smith lived that for an entire film shoot. Smith was a lifelong Bruce Willis fan. Getting the chance to direct Willis in a buddy cop comedy opposite Tracy Morgan should have been the highlight of his career. He even took a pay cut just to be on the project. Instead, Smith later described the experience as soul-crushing. Willis apparently decided he didn't want to be there. He refused to do a photo shoot for the poster. He gave the absolute minimum effort in every scene, just completely checked out. Meanwhile, Tracy Morgan was throwing himself into the role, working his ass off, trying to make the movie work. Smith said that if it weren't for Morgan's professionalism, he might have killed himself or someone else during production. The whole point of a buddy cop movie is chemistry between the two leads. You can't fake that. When one guy is trying and the other guy clearly doesn't want to be there, it poisons everything. So Cop Out opened at number 2 behind Shutter Island. Made $55 million against a $30 million budget. Critics destroyed it, and Smith did not take it well. He went on Twitter and said that writing a nasty review for Cop Out was like bullying a kid. He never worked with a major studio again. Norman Mailer was one of the most famous writers in America. He was also convinced he was a genius at everything. So at some point in the late 60s, he decided he was going to be a filmmaker too. His third film was called Maidstone. There was no script. The idea was to get a bunch of actors together in the Hamptons for 5 days and just improvise the whole thing. Mailer would play a director who was also running for president. Rip Torn would play his scheming half-brother. They'd figure out the rest as they went. On the last day of shooting, one of his actors picked up a hammer and hit him in the head with it. I need you to understand this wasn't a stunt. Rip Torn just walked up behind Mailer and cracked his skull open. Blood everywhere. They ended up on the ground fighting for real. Mailer bit a chunk out of Torn's ear. Torn tried to strangle him. And then Mailer watched that footage and thought, this is perfect. This goes in the movie. It did not save the movie, though. Maidstone opened at a theater in New York and did the worst business in that theater's history. Mailer went bankrupt, and the movie basically disappeared after that. Nobody saw it for 35 years until a French company put out a DVD in 2006. Nobody tells you no after you win Best Picture. That was the problem. Michael Cimino had just won Best Picture for The Deer Hunter, 5 Oscars total. He was 39 years old and Hollywood treated him like a genius. So when he brought United Artists his next project, they said yes to everything. Total creative control, no limits. Whatever he needed. Cimino wanted to make a Western. What he actually made was a 4-year catastrophe. 6 days into shooting, he was already 5 days behind. He'd spent $900,000 and had about 90 seconds of footage he could actually use. He was so paranoid about interference that he changed the locks on the editing room so the studio couldn't even see what he was doing. One of his actors got so bored waiting around that he left, made a whole other movie with David Lynch, and came back. That's how slow things were moving. When Cimino finally showed executives his cut, it was 5.5 hours long. He said he could probably trim 15 minutes. They eventually got it down to 3 hours and 40 minutes for the New York premiere. When word got back to Hollywood about how bad it was, producers at the Beverly Hills Hotel were cheering. The New York Times said Cimino must have sold his soul to the devil. United Artists pulled the movie after 1 week. They'd never done that before. They cut it down to 2.5 hours and tried again. A sales executive said later that it was like someone had called every single house in America and told them not to go see it. $44 million budget. $3.5 million at the box office. United Artists' parent company turned around and sold the whole studio to MGM. Cimino didn't direct another film for 5 years. And after Heaven's Gate, studios stopped handing out blank checks to directors. That whole era of the 70s was over.